Let's go back in vintage history. Classic cinema TV. Wendy's Classic Corner. Wendy's Classic Corner.
Hello, welcome to Wendy's Classic Corner. I'm Wendy, and today I want to talk about musicals. Another very popular genre of film, musicals are still every bit as popular today. Musicals are often very grand with elaborate song and dance numbers and impressive sets. Musicals harken back to music theater, which has been around since the mid-1800s, with some pointing to Gilbert and Sullivan and Harrigan and Hart as some of the early folks who developed the current format of our musicals. In fact, musicals are so popular that I have 4 guests on the show today who want to talk about musicals, which is the most guests I've ever had on my show. Because we have 1 extra guest today, I'm going to limit my review to 1 musical, and it was rather hard to narrow down because there are several that I really like. Some suggestions I have as to musicals I like are The Music Man, which would have been my second choice, Yankee Doodle Dandy, The King and I, and South Pacific. But today, I'm going to talk about Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, 1953. I think probably many of you have seen this musical. This movie is so cute, delightful, funny, and has very catchy songs, and it just makes me feel good. It stars one of my favorites, the gorgeous Marilyn Monroe. This film also stars Jane Russell, Elliott Reid, Tommy Noonan, and Charles Coburn. It was directed by Howard Hawks, who didn't necessarily direct a lot of musicals. In fact, Howard Hawks had nothing to do with directing the musical numbers, and it was choreographer Jack Cole who would direct those. At the time of production, Marilyn was more an up-and-coming star rather than an established one, and it was a big point of contention that she was paid a mere $500 a week salary, whereas Jane Russell earned $200,000 for the movie. Marilyn had a gift of comic timing and was quite funny in many of her films, including this one. The film begins with 2 friends, Lorelei, played by Marilyn, and Dorothy, played by Jane Russell, who are performing in a show. Lorelei has a rich boyfriend, Gus, played by Tommy Noonan, who she is trying to hook. Lorelei is very interested in money and diamonds, Dorothy is not. Lorelei and Gus are making plans to sail to France to get married, but Gus's father disapproves of the match and refuses to allow him to go. Lorelei instead takes Dorothy on the trip on Gus's dime. Also joining them on the ship is a private investigator named Ernie Malone, played by Elliott Reid, who is secretly hired by Gus's father to spy on Lorelei. However, Malone immediately notices Dorothy and is smitten with her. He sets about to woo her while still keeping tabs on Lorelei. In the meantime, Lorelei has met the owner of a diamond mine, by Sir Francis Beekman, played by Charles Coburn, who has a very prim and proper wife. The wife has a beautiful diamond tiara that Lorelei takes a fancy to. Lorelei spends a great deal of her time dancing and flirting with Beekman, who is nicknamed Piggy in the film. She also attempts to fix Dorothy up with one of the passengers, Henry Spofford III, that she thinks is quite rich, only to find out in a very hilarious scene that he is a child. George Winslow plays Henry Spofford, and he is an absolute treasure, one of the best characters in the film. Dorothy winds up catching Malone spying on Lorelei and realizes he must have been hired by Gus's father. She is outraged, and they go through an elaborate scheme to steal the film from his camera. This is an extremely funny scene in the film. Lorelei also takes advantage of the situation to persuade Piggy to give her his wife's diamond tiara. The girls finally arrive in Paris and go shopping, only to find an unpleasant surprise at their hotel. They are taken into a small room and questioned by Mrs. Beekman, Ernie Malone, and an insurance man about the theft of the tiara. Lorelei admits to having it, but says it was not stolen and refuses to return it. Dorothy and Lorelei are then told that Gus has canceled all their funding and they have nowhere to stay. I don't want to reveal any more about the film in case some of our viewers have not seen it. I would say there's another hilarious scene involving a court hearing and Dorothy pretending to be Lorelei that you don't want to miss. One of the things I love best about this film is it feels more like a cute comedy with some catchy songs thrown in rather than a film with characters just bursting into song constantly, which is a complaint I do have about some musicals. The dialogue is very clever and witty, especially Jane Russell's dialogue. She has some of the funniest lines in the film, and she delivers them with great dry humor. Everything about this film is delightful, and I hope you will check it out if you haven't seen it, or revisit it if you have. It should be easy to obtain a copy from your local library or to stream. Hello? Sounds good, send them in. Well, folks, it's time to hear what our viewers have to say. First up, we have our friend Kirk, who is a regular on the show. Hi, Kirk, so great to see you. I know you picked something fantastic out for us today.
Hi, Wendy. How are you today?
I'm doing great. What do you
Having me
have
in.
for us today?
I brought one of the most iconic musicals ever, 1961 Best Picture winner, West Side Story. And this is one of my personal favorites, probably my favorite musical. And it's, the story is the basic, Romeo and Juliet, modern, retold for, a modern age. It centers on two rival New York street gangs, the Jets and the Sharks. The Jets are the native white kids. The Sharks are made up of first generation Puerto Rican immigrants. And they basically have a turf war over their neighborhood. And in the middle of that, you have Tony and Maria. Tony is the former leader of the Jets, semi-retired, seems to be trying to turn his life around, but kind of keeps getting dragged back in. He's turned the reins over to his friend Riff, who runs the gang now. On the other side, Maria is the brother or the sister of Bernardo, the leader of the Sharks. So there's obviously a conflict there. One night there is a dance at the school gym, which is neutral territory. And Riff is planning on challenging Bernardo to one final battle to see who's going to run the territory permanently. Riff invites Tony along for support. Maria's also there. They meet each other, fall in love at first sight. So they have that bond and that connection, and they decide that for them to be able to be together, they have to make peace between the gangs. They're going to try and stop this rumble from happening. Ironically, by getting involved, they make things a lot worse. And the whole movie from there, basically, it hits the Romeo and Juliet beat. So if you're familiar with that story, you kind of have an idea where it's heading from there. So I have a lot to say about it, but you and I talked about this before, and I know this is one that you said you were putting off and you've watched it for the first time. So I just wondered, why was it that you took so long to get to it? Now that you've seen it, what were your initial thoughts?
It was something well, first of all, I'm not the biggest fan of musicals, and I had a little bit of a petty beef against this musical specifically. It won the Best Supporting Actor role for George Chakiris, and he beat my favorite actor, Montgomery Clift, out for Judgment in Nuremberg, and so I had a little bit of anger about that. Very unfair to take it out on West Side Story.
That's me with Sunset Boulevard and All About Eve, so I completely understand.
Yeah, just very unfair to take it out on West Side Story, but having seen West Side Story, I was really impressed with a couple things. First of all, the cinematography, amazing. The cinematographer, I believe he did The Great Escape. I believe he did The Unsinkable Molly Brown, and I think he won an Academy Award.
I believe they won Best Cinematography. Yeah,
it's excellent. And talk a little bit about some of the different shots they have. It's really interesting the way they shoot the film.
Yeah, what I love about this movie, I think it's the most perfect blend of stage and screen. You never forget you're watching a play. But it takes all the best elements of the stage and the movies and kind of blends them together. I mean, you have an opening scene where you just get these great aerial shots in New York and just showing the different neighborhoods and different areas. They come down and you have that big first, the iconic fight scene, and everything looks like it might on a stage, just bigger and grander, like a movie. And you get a lot of aerial shots of the groups and the battles, and a lot of great camera work. The use of lighting and color, just certain things bathed in color. So I always say about this, this could only be in the movies, but it still maintains that spirit through the look and through that cinematography of a stage play. It's best of both worlds.
Yeah, and I thought also another thing I noticed is I really like the way the music was set with the action that was happening. Not necessarily the singing, just the theme music itself. And of course, we're talking about Leonard Bernstein, one of the greatest composers, nominated for an Academy Award for On the Waterfront, not nominated for this film. music going with the choreography, going with just the action on the film. Talk a little bit about the choreography in this film.
Yeah, I really like the choreography in this. I think that's one of the things that really kind of gets maligned from the movie. Like people say it's kind of cheesy with them dancing, and the dance fights and all that. But when I watch it this time, I really realize I think it's translating that idea of the violence and the rage that they have. This is about young people with no outlet. Is basically what this movie is. A bunch of people who are angry at the world, angry at each other, at themselves, and they have nothing to do with it. And I think you really see that in that choreography, where there are some scenes where they're it's all precision, they're working together, but then you have those scenes where one person will just jump out and do something, and I think it really captures just that pent up energy that these kids have, and it feels to me like a ballet. In a ballet,
it is very balletic.
Everything is the ideas, the themes, everything has to be expressed through the dance because you have nothing else, and I think that carries over to this, where it's very much representing, when you take it at face value, it does look a little silly, but when you really think about what it represents, it does a really good job carrying those themes and ideas.
Yeah, it's like the fight scenes specifically very, very choreographed, and it's like very interesting the way, and it is, like, I agree with you, very balletic. But a little bit about too the actors in this film. Everybody does a really great job. Of course, we have Russ Tamblyn playing Riff. He's a veteran of musicals. He's also in Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. But we also have Natalie Wood, who's not like who you think of as a big musical star. Now, was she dubbed? Her singing dubbed?
Yeah,
I was going to say it had to have been.
Yeah, she was dubbed. I don't know if Natalie Wood expected to sing in this or not, but I think it's pretty seamless. I think that when you hear her voice, her speaking voice versus singing, you really can't tell. I think Russ Tamblyn too. Something I noticed in this viewing was his physicality.
Yeah.
Just his just a lot of like gymnastics and very very mobile character, just always jumping and flipping and doing a lot of really difficult things. Even in the fight scenes, the more serious scenes, there's a lot of physicality to that part.
Yeah, he was a really talented dancer, and we have also in this film Rita Moreno, who's actually still with us, which is really exciting when we can talk about an actress that's still here and still making movies.
And she looks great. She's like 90 years old.
Just made her movie recently,
yeah,
so I mean that's just awesome. But plays Bernardo's girlfriend in the film, a big good friend of Natalie Wood's in the film. Really good job again by her. All the actors in this film did a really wonderful job. It's a very impactful film. Is there any other little tidbits you want to leave us with?
I just talking about the actual the songs real quick. One of the things I really love about this too is a lot of the songs, like specifically America, Officer Krumke. Both songs that are fun and very just very snappy to watch, and you sing along and everything. But there's a lot of meaning behind them as well. America, I think, does a really great job of expressing that immigrant experience and the ideal versus the reality. And just the choreography of that scene that's probably my favorite dance number on film all time. And Officer Krumke, again, is on the surface a very silly song, but if you listen to what they're saying, these are kids who just have no direction and nobody knows what to do with them.
You're dealing with, you're kind of dealing with the racism in this film.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, they're making a stand like, these Puerto Ricans are being treated in a racist manner. So I think that too is like a very important component of the film, that they're trying at that time they're trying to address like racism being wrong. And we're talking about the 60s, right?
Oh, absolutely, 61, I think it does. I mean, the movie does a good job of making you understand where both sides are coming from. But you definitely get that idea. I mean, there's one scene where the police officer, the neighborhood police officer, who's kind of in charge of quelching these gang fights. He tells the white kids, "I'm on your side." He wants to see the Puerto Ricans put down. So they're definitely portrayed. And I mean, it's not perfect. It's 1961, but there's definitely that idea of portraying them in a sympathetic light, and you see the greater hardships they have where they're coming from.
Yeah. So West Side Story, awesome film, definitely one to see for musicals. And as always, we love having you on the show, Kirk. Thank you, Kirk.
Thank you.
And it's always awesome to talk with you, and thanks for finally getting me to watch this film. Next up, we have Jim, who is also joining us in the studio today. Hi, Jim. What musical do you want to tell us about?
I'd like to talk about Top Hat,
Awesome.
1935.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about the plot.
Well, first of all, Jerry Travers is played by Fred Astaire, and he comes to London to be a part of a show produced by Horace Hardwick, played by Edward Everett Horton. And while in his motel room, he starts to dance. He dances very loudly, and unfortunately, in the floor below is Ginger Rogers, who plays Dale Tremont, and she gets woken up by this. She goes up to the room, gets the hotel manager, goes up to the room, and that's the first time Jerry sees her, and he kind of likes her. And so after that, he follows her around London for quite a while. Eventually, they go to Venice. Dale wasn't really sure about Fred. She thought he was married to Madge, who is Horace's wife, played by Helen Broderick. And the misunderstandings continue. Eventually, they're all sorted out, and Jerry and Dale get married at the end.
Yeah, it's Madge is also a friend of Ginger Rogers, Dale's character
Yes.
in the film. So she thinks that she's going around with this friend of her husband's friend, and
Exactly.
it's all very funny and convoluted, and everybody's confused, and there's a lot of really cute scenes there. But tell us a little bit about some of the actors in the film.
Well, also in the film is Eric Blore, and he plays a great butler all the time, sort of a snooty type of butler, and he was terrific in this role. And also there was Eric Rhodes, who played the part of Alberto Bedini, who thinks he marries Dale at some point in the film, and it all gets upset later.
He's a very funny character in that film. He plays like this, I guess, Italian character.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, he's a costume designer, I believe, and he wants her to wear these dresses. So tell us a little bit about the songs. Irving Berlin, obviously an awesome composer, so tell us a little bit about that.
Well, this was the first film score that Irving Berlin had written since 1930, and apparently he'd lost a bit of confidence in writing film scores, and he wrote a bunch of numbers for this film, and only 5 of them were used in the film. But he negotiated a very interesting contract. He said that he wanted the complete copyright control of the songs in the film, and if the film made more than $1,250,000, he got 10% of the profit. Well, the film made $3.2 million, so he got a handsome return on that. The songs that are in the film are No Strings, in which Jerry professes to be a bachelor for life, and that's just when he meets Dale, when he finds that, when he sings that. Isn't This a Lovely Day? And this was when they were in a gazebo in the rainstorm. And Top Hat, White Tie and Tails, a very famous number for Fred tap solo. Cheek to Cheek, and then finally the Piccolino.
So is this the first film from Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, or had they already done films together before?
Well, this is the fourth, and this was the 4th out of 10 films.
10.
And this was the most popular of all of them. And it was the biggest film for RKO in 1935. And overall, in the whole industry, it was the 2nd biggest film of the whole industry in 1935.
And they got along pretty well, Fred and Ginger, except for one little exception. There was something that drove Fred crazy about this particular movie.
It was Cheek to Cheek. And Ginger considered herself, she was interested in designing her own clothes. And so she wanted to wear this dress made with ostrich feathers. And it took a long time for the seamstresses to make this dress. And Fred didn't see it until the day of the shoot. And when she came out, and every step she took, she was shedding ostrich feathers. And Fred said she looked like a chicken being attacked by a coyote. And he got really mad at her, and Ginger went off the stage in tears, and her mother, Leela, who was also in the studio, came up and went at Fred and defended her daughter. Well, overnight, the seamstresses fixed most of the problems with the dress. But even when they shot it the next day, even afterwards, if you look very closely in the film, you'll see there's still some ostrich feathers on the floor. on the dance floor.
Poor Fred. Thanks, Jim. It's always a pleasure to chat with you about film. And who doesn't love Fred and Ginger? Next up, we have Christina, who is joining us on Zoom from New York. Hi, Christina. What musical do you want to talk about today?
About The Sound of Music. Now, before anybody groans, you might think, oh, that's so old-fashioned. It's done every high school musical. But let me tell you, it is the epitome of the classic Hollywood musical. It's got the music of Rodgers and Hammerstein. It's a tender love story between Maria and the captain, and even Rolf and Liesel, their young love at 16 going on 17. It's hilarious. From, Maria sitting on a pine cone to the kids falling in the water. It has so much slapstick comedy in it. It could actually even qualify as a screwball comedy. So it's a movie musical. It's a comedy. It's a tender romance. And it's based on an inspirational true story of a family fleeing the Nazis. What more could you ask of a movie? It stars Julie Andrews, Christopher Plummer, directed by the amazing Robert Wise, who actually won for directing this, the Academy Award. Interestingly, Robert Wise was not the first director that they considered for this movie. Originally, that was going to go to William Wyler. And he actually was going to make it a little bit darker. You were going to see a whole lot more Nazis and a lot more oppression. So you actually got a lighter film because of Robert Wise. Oh, also the scene where the kids are in the boat with Maria. Poor little Gretel, played by what was her name? Karen Karat. She nearly drowned. But turns out Gretel couldn't swim. So Julie Andrews tells the story how the director tells her last minute, just so you know, the little girl, she can't swim. You have to go in after her when we dump you all in the water. And Julie Andrews like, what? So they dump everybody in the water, but Julie falls the other way, so she can't get to Gretel. So it's actually the girl who played Louisa who goes in and dives in after Gretel so she doesn't drown. And the opening twirly scene, Maria, they filmed that scene on the mountain in the beginning where she's twirling. They filmed it using a helicopter. So the backdraft of the helicopter actually made Julie Andrews do a pratfall, but the helicopter was out of shot. It left before she fell. So you didn't get the pratfall on film, but she kept falling down from the backdraft of the helicopter.
Ah, poor Julie Andrews. Poor Julie Andrews. But Christina, how accurate is this to the actual story? Because I believe that I've read that this is pretty. They take a lot of liberties with this particular story.
Well, I actually read the original book by Maria von Trapp, and the funny thing is, yes, they took a lot of liberties, but the part of the movie where the Nazis want him to serve in the Navy for them, and because he's a naval hero, and he doesn't want to, and if he says no, they're going to kill him. That is true. They had to leave because her father, the captain, did not want to serve the Nazis. He was very much against them. Another part which also was true, in the book, where you have in the movie, there's a baroness who kind of is a rival for the captain. In the book, there was a princess. So those were some similarities there. Another thing, a couple of things that differed, the escape over the mountaintop, which kind of was great for dramatic purposes.
Yes.
In real life, they actually escaped on a train.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. So thank you for telling us about those differences and the similarities. And of course, Sound of Music has so many, just very iconic songs.
So the music, Rodgers and Hammerstein, you cannot get any more classic than that. And this film almost didn't get made because even though 20th Century Fox had purchased the rights in 1959, at the time, I'm sure you've heard of the financial drain that was the movie Cleopatra with Elizabeth Taylor. It had them in such debt that they weren't planning to do any other properties. And it wasn't until Zanuck took over that they decided to make the film, and it was released in 1965, becoming the highest grossing film of all time, and it held that record for 5 years, beating out Gone with the Wind.
Well, thank you very much, Christina. The Sound of Music is just an absolute classic. You can't go wrong with it. Next up, we have Bob, who is also from New York and who is also joining us via Zoom. Hi, Bob. What film do you want to talk about?
Hi, Wendy. Well, we've done West Side Story, so I'm going to do West Point Story, which is a Warner Brothers musical, not as well known, but one of the things I love about it, it's a real Warner Brothers centric musical. Everything about it is Warner. Um, it had James Cagney, who was one of Warner's biggest stars, Doris Day, who was Warner's biggest musical star, Virginia Mayo, Gordon McRae, Gene Nelson also made musicals at Warner's, and it was directed by Roy Del Ruth, who had been with Warner since the silent days. It harkens back to Yankee Doodle Dandy with the military theme. It also kind of harkens back to some early Warner Brothers comedies, Brother Rat and Flirtation Walk, that had military academy themes. It was made in 1950, and it concerns Cagney. Cagney plays a Broadway producer director who is very James Cagney. He's opinionated. He's difficult to get along with. He doesn't have a lot of respect. He doesn't suffer fools gladly.
I mean, he's punching people. He's punching people frequently in the film.
Yes, yes. Hey, you know, how many musicals do you have where people are punching each other? Really? So anyway, this Broadway producer, played by James Cagney, is hired by another producer to go to West Point. This producer, whose name is Harry Eberhard, has a nephew that's at West Point, and Eberhard believes this nephew could be a huge Broadway star. So Eberhard sends Cagney to West Point to direct the show and to hopefully get the nephew, played by Gordon McRae, to fall in love with the theater and the bright lights and to forget about having a military career. Later, Cagney also enlists Doris Day. That will just make the enticement of leaving the academy that much better. During an early rehearsal, Cagney punches out one of the leading players. As a matter of fact, he punches out Alan Hale Jr., who was the skipper on Gilligan's Island, and he's almost fired, and everything is almost over. But the cadets come up with an idea. Let's have Bixby, Cagney, live at the point so he understands what the traditions are, what everything is all about, and that happens. Okay, and as you might guess, Day and McRae fall in love, which I won't go into the details of.
There's kind of a real patriotic West Point type feeling. This also reminds me of a parallel with George Cagney in musicals, of course, very patriotic in Yankee Doodle Dandy. And I mean, it's just always so interesting to see James Cagney doing song and dance when you sort of really always think of him as this tough guy role. And I ask you, Bob, is there a more versatile actor than James Cagney? He can do everything.
No. In a word, no. Although, if we're talking about versatile actress who can do anything, then I would go to Barbara Stanwyck. There's a really interesting background to the film. Cagney made this right after White Heat. Mm. And he decided that after, White Heat was so intense, top of the world and everything, and blowing the world up, that he wanted to do something fun.
Yeah.
And so he came up with this idea of doing a musical. One thing that I find absolutely fascinating about Cagney, although he made one other musical and then he went into retirement in 1961, Jack Warner begged him to come out of retirement to play Alfred Doolittle, Eliza Doolittle's father, in My Fair Lady. So we would have seen Cagney singing A Little Bit of Luck and Get Me to the Church on Time. And I bet he would have been fantastic.
Oh, man. Well, I don't know. I can't see anybody but Stanley Holloway in that role, to be honest. But, Bob, I want to thank you. It's always fun to see James Cagney doing the song and dance. Well, folks, that's all the time we have for today. I've really enjoyed talking about musicals with you and hope our viewers have enjoyed the show. And remember, if you want to be a guest on the show, you simply have to follow Wendy's Classic Corner on Facebook or email me at wendysclassiccorner@gmail.com. Until next time, this is Wendy from Wendy's Classic Corner saying so long, and here's looking at you, kid.
So
go anywhere else for classic movies.